After spending almost 25 years on death row, Norman Mearle Grim was executed by lethal injection in Florida. But to understand how Norman's story led to that final moment, we need to go back to the morning of July 27, 1998, the day his neighbor, Cynthia Campbell, was discovered dead in the waters of Pensacola Bay. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, James Andrews was fishing off the Pensacola Bay Bridge with his young son when he felt something catch on his line. He tugged and pulled it in. But what broke the surface wasn't a fish, it was a body, wrapped tight in sheets, plastic, and masking tape. Authorities pulled the bundle from the water and later identified the body as Cynthia Campbell. But how did she end up in the river, wrapped in plastic? Just that morning, a few hours before the discovery, a call came in to dispatch about a disturbance behind a house in a quiet Pensacola neighborhood. Deputy Timothy Lynch responded around 5 a.m. When he arrived, he found Cynthia already waiting on her front porch, barefoot, wrapped in a nightgown and robe. Standing beside her was her 38-year-old neighbor, Norman Grim, shirtless and barefoot himself, wearing only cut-off jeans. The scene felt strange but not dangerous, and at first there didn't seem to be any clear threat. The three of them walked toward the back of Cynthia's house, and under the porch light, Tim noticed a broken window. Glass shards glittered in the grass, and in the flower bed, a chrome lug nut caught the morning light. It looked minor, just a small act of vandalism at worst, but something about it didn't feel right. Before leaving, the deputy wrapped up his paperwork, and Norman turned to Cynthia with a calm smile. He said she could come over for coffee once the deputy was gone, but nobody knew this would be the last time anyone saw her alive. By 7:20 that morning, Cynthia's bookkeeper, Connie Kelly, pulled into the driveway, and right away she sensed something was off. The front door was unlocked, but Cynthia didn't answer when she called her name. Connie walked through the kitchen, expecting to find her boss running late, but the house was silent. Cynthia, who was a lawyer, rarely late and never missed a meeting, was nowhere to be found. So Connie stepped back outside and immediately called the police. Within the next hour, more people showed up. Cynthia McGee, her paralegal, pulled up next. She saw Cynthia's car still parked outside, with her purse sitting in plain view on the seat. But just like Connie, she couldn't find her anywhere. At that same moment, two deputies, Calvin Rutherford and Stephen McCauley, pulled up and started knocking on doors. When they reached Norman's house, he came to the door shirtless again. The deputy spotted a faint stain on his shoulder that looked like blood and asked him about it. But Norman told them it was primer paint from working on his car, and inside his house, nothing looked out of place. He acted casual, friendly even, so the deputies left without much concern. By 11 a.m., Corporal Blevin Davis joined the search. He, too, spoke with Norman and noticed the same shoulder stain, but he saw more. Norman's cut-off jeans seemed speckled with small reddish-brown stains, and there was one more mark on his shoulder, which was darker than the rest. But Norman gave the same explanation he gave the other officers. It was paint. Davis made a note of it, but didn't push further. And since Cynthia's house showed no signs of a break-in or struggle either, officers logged the visit and moved on, assuming she had simply gone out for the day. But what none of them realized was that her body was already there, hidden, and they had walked right past it. Norman had already wrapped Cynthia's body in bed sheets, a shower curtain, masking tape, and black garbage bags, and had stashed it in the trunk of his car. The officers had asked him if he could open it, but he told them he didn't have the keys. And around 1 p.m., he left the neighborhood and headed straight for the Pensacola Bay Bridge, which stretched for miles across the Gulf, connecting the city to the open water. If he dumped her there, he figured, the current would do the rest. Somewhere along the bridge, Norman pulled over. He parked on the shoulder, opened both car doors, and popped the trunk. Drivers passing by saw him pacing beside the car, wearing a light-colored shirt and those same cut-off jeans he had been wearing earlier that morning. From a distance, it looked like he had car trouble, but the truth sat heavy in the back, silent, wrapped, and lifeless. Norman waited, and when the road was clear, he reached into the trunk and pulled Cynthia's body out. He carried it to the edge of the bridge and without hesitation lifted it over the rail. Then he let go. The bundle dropped into the water and began to sink until there was nothing left to see. Norman climbed back into his car and drove away, leaving the bridge as if nothing had happened. On the way home, he stopped at a small bait and tackle shop near the base of the bridge. The man behind the counter remembered how odd he looked. Norman acted all restless and distracted, and he was all sweaty. He bought something small, something forgettable, and walked back out to his car. But Cynthia's body didn't stay hidden for long. Just over an hour later, around 3:30 p.m., a fisherman and his young son were fishing beneath that same bridge when their hook caught something heavy. It was Cynthia. And when the call came in that a woman's body had been pulled from the bay, detectives knew they weren't chasing a missing person anymore. This was a homicide. Detective Donnie Wiggin headed straight to the bait shop near the base of the Pensacola Bay Bridge. He asked questions, pulled the surveillance tape, and rolled it back to the early afternoon. There, on the screen, was Norman, walking through the door at exactly 2:03 p.m. He was wearing the same cut-off jeans and the same light shirt. But it wasn't just what he was wearing. It was how he moved. He looked jittery, off, and now unmistakably connected. At the same time that footage was playing back, officers stood at the water's edge, peeling away the soaked sheets from Cynthia's body. Tangled in the fabric were strips of green carpet. And one detective didn't even need a sample bag. He recognized it immediately. There was a nearly identical piece hanging over the railing of Norman's back porch that morning. And when they reached the body, Cynthia was still wearing her nightshirt. With that, everything started to connect. The broken window, the stains on Norman's shorts, the nightgown Cynthia was wearing, and the carpet. By nightfall, detectives had enough. A search warrant was signed for Norman's home, and an arrest warrant for murder followed. Every movement he had made that day, from the broken window behind her house to the bridge where he dumped her body, had come full circle. By 6 p.m., his house was sealed off as a crime scene, but Norman was already gone. Inside, investigators found the kind of details that sealed the case. From the back porch, a faint smell of bleach still hung in the air. They found 2 damp mops nearby, both stained with what looked like blood. Smears trailed across the kitchen floor, and on the counter they found a coffee cup with Cynthia's fingerprints. Next to it lay a box of trash bags. One side was streaked with blood and marked with Norman's prints. In the trash can, they found a striped pillowcase that matched the sheets used to wrap Cynthia's body. And in the living room, detectives collected a pair of athletic shoes, blue shorts, and a piece of rope, all spotted with blood. And on the back porch, they found the carpet, the same green fabric as the one Cynthia had been wrapped in. But the search didn't stop there. In a cooler, detectives found a hammer with dried blood, a steak knife, a pair of women's glasses, a tampon, underwear, masking tape, and a Bud Light carton. And the lab results left no room for doubt. Cynthia's DNA was found everywhere. On Norman's shorts, on his shoes, on the hammer, and on the knife in the cooler. His fingerprints were on the tape, and her blood was on his kitchen floor. Even the bedsheets wrapped around her body came from his own bed. And the autopsy confirmed the horror. The forensic pathologist listed that Cynthia had been stabbed 11 times in the chest, of which 7 pierced her heart. Her face and scalp were covered in deep bruises, injuries consistent with repeated strikes from a hammer. The pathologist said the blows to her head came first, followed by the stab wounds. And the official cause of death was blunt force trauma and multiple stab wounds. She had been raped, beaten, stabbed, wrapped in bedsheets, and dumped into the bay. And Norman was the one responsible for it. But where was he? In the days that followed, Norman made it all the way to Oklahoma, but by July 31, 1998, just 3 days after the murder, U.S. Marshals had him in handcuffs. And back in Florida, the evidence against him was overwhelming. During trial, prosecutors walked the jury through the timeline minute by minute. They showed the jury the surveillance footage of Norman at the bait shop just an hour before Cynthia's body had been found. They laid out the forensic reports, DNA results, and expert testimony, and all of it tied him to the crime scene. When it was over, the jury didn't need long to decide. Norman was found guilty of first-degree murder and battery with the use of a deadly weapon. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors brought up Norman's past: robberies, kidnappings, and violent assaults that stretched back for years. Each conviction showed the same pattern. His violence wasn't slowing down. It was getting worse over time. Then came Cynthia Campbell, Cynthia's mother. She stood before the jury, her hands trembling, and read a short statement about her daughter's life and the hole left behind. When it was over, the jury's vote was unanimous, 12-0 for death. But after the verdict, Norman refused to fight for his life. He just sat there, motionless, and told his lawyers not to call a single witness, not to show a single photograph, and not to argue for mercy, even as the court appointed special counsel to investigate anything that might lessen his sentence. His childhood, his mental health, or his years in prison, Norman refused to participate. Against his lawyer's advice, he demanded silence. He even told the judge outright he didn't want mercy. He wanted to die. Still, the court considered what little it could. Records showed a chaotic upbringing, childhood abuse, and signs of mental instability that never received real treatment. But the aggravating factors outweighed them all. He was already under a sentence when the murder happened. He had prior violent felonies, and he killed Cynthia during a sexual assault. In December 2000, the judge officially handed down the sentence: death for murder, plus a total of 390 months for sexual battery, to be served consecutively as if time still mattered. Norman spent almost 25 years on death row, and now in his 60s, he still refuses to answer questions. He has never expressed remorse, never filed a clemency plea, and never explained why he did it. Then his final day came, October 28, 2025. On the morning of his execution, Norman woke up around 6 a.m. According to the Department of Corrections, he didn't ask to see a spiritual advisor, and no visitors came to see him in the hours before his death. As the day wore on, he remained alone. Later that afternoon, he was served his final meal: fried pork chops, mashed potatoes, a chocolate milkshake, and a slice of pie. At exactly 6 p.m., the curtain to the death chamber went up. Norman lay strapped to the gurney, one arm stretched out with an IV already in place. When asked if he wanted to give a final statement, he kept his voice low and flat. "No, sir." Roughly a minute later, the injection began. Norman closed his eyes and drew in a few heavy breaths. His body twitched slightly, then stopped moving altogether. The warden stepped forward, shook him a few times, and called his name, but he didn't respond. At 6:13 p.m., a medic entered to check his vitals, and 1 minute later, Norman was declared dead. Norman Mearle Grim was 65 years old. What do you think? Has justice been served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.